recording on the cloud. Good morning, everybody. This is Olga Luchikova with the Society for the Phenomenology of Religious Experience. And we have now the lecture Emerging Scholar Series. Our guest lecturer today is Anna Westin from London School of Theology. Anna lectures in ethics, and today she will be presenting on Panim and plurality of the unified faith. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. This is a kind of an ongoing conversation. I've been speaking to a Jewish scholar on the various concepts of the language of Panim, and so it's very much an ongoing kind of discussion. So I'd love to have your feedback, your thoughts on it, as it is a kind of a deliberation process. And so I'm looking at the phenomenology of Levinas, and he has a phenomenology of the face, and it's the face in which we encounter the other, and this is his he frames religious experience in terms of the face-to-face encounter, and I want to tie that into the language of Panim, and Nigel Zimmerman has written a really interesting book on facing the other, and he talks about the face and John Paul II's philosophy and Levinas's philosophy of the face and such. So I'm going to look at the face as a way of understanding religious experience, basically. So how do we define religious experience? We've got kind of Swinburne, we've got William James's under kind of more analytic understandings of religious experience, where we have religious experience is a subjective experience interpreted within a religious framework. We've got the ontological arguments for the existence of God as some kind of understanding of the religious, teleological arguments, Pascal's wager, etc. And kind of emerging in a slight contrast to that, we've got the phenomenology of the religious experience, where for Levinas, he doesn't prove God's existence. He doesn't feel like he needs to prove the existence of a religious experience. He just kind of goes with it, which I think is an interesting way of just unpacking that. So if we're assuming this kind of God relation, how do we look at our reality and our context? So Levinas wants to use phenomenology. He's contrasting it with ontology, the study of being. He wants to frame it in phenomenology, and I'll kind of go into why he does that. But I think that phenomenology gives a way for us to understand the subjective experiences of the religious experience, the subjectivity, in a way that perhaps ontology, more analytic philosophy, doesn't. And so in this discussion, I want to situate the human experience as lived in concrete and specific individual lives alongside others. I think phenomenology takes into account the conscious experience of the subject as a body and as perceiving and engaging with the world around us, while also recognizing the importance of reason and critical questions concerning this being in the world and the particularity of this existence. And so the phenomenological method that I want to use is one that Javi Carrel uses, that I think works really well with Levinas. And she sees everyday human experiences, so the everyday, the ordinary, as philosophically significant. And she says she uses phenomenology because of how it can reveal implicit structures of experience. So we've got the normal experiences, and then bringing those implicit structures into awareness. It's concerned with a pre-reflective everyday life, human subjective experience, and existential themes such as freedom. So there's a sense in which it particularizes existence as well. And I found that really helpful for looking at religious experiences in particular. So Carell writes that to study the lived experience, it's necessary to explore its existential, ethical, and social dimension. So we can't just have a kind of a rational understanding of experience based on reason alone. Philosophy has said that for a while, but we have to look at its implicit structures, its existential tones, its ethical and its social dimensions. And I think phenomenology as a way of doing this through understanding embodiment. And so Carell said that. I want to look at how Levinas takes this interpretation of phenomenology. So I found that the writings of Emmanuel Levinas are of particular help for developing this phenomenological account of religious experience. And I've chosen him, not just because I did my PhD on him, but because of the detailed manner in which he explains our subjectivity in terms of how we relate to others. So who we are is a relational being, a particularized, relational, embodied being. And he meditates, what I think is beautiful is he meditates on just the ordinary encounters of life. And considers their philosophical importance to how we understand ourselves and how we understand others. So it's really the ordinary as well as the extraordinary. But the extraordinary is actually in the ordinary, which he frames subjectivity as a kind of love relation expressed as responsibility for the other. And the other is someone that cannot be contained by us. So the other is outside of us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So in order to get to grips with this relationship with Levinas's subject and the other, I think it's important to understand more about how he writes. So Simon Critchley, who's a Levinasian scholar, suggests that life for Levinas is the love of life, and love of life, what life comes from, which is the sensible world. So for him, religious experience is ultimately tied into this love of life and this engagement with the sensible material world. There's this overlapping that happens. And in one of his texts, which is Of God Who Comes to Mind, Levinas shows how he thinks that a lot of Western thought about the subject has been relegated to understanding our deficiency. So man's inferiority to his task, our lacking. And this is something he wants to resist. For him, there's this kind of this upsurge of the more. It's not talking so much about our inferiority of our task of existence, but the more and the less. So rather than framing the human experience as a struggle with deficiency towards death, Levinas is suggesting that human experience is bursting of the more in the less. Life is less about figuring out how to survive it and more about grappling with what it looks like to live as wholly in the midst of the idea of the infinite. So he ties this idea into how he wants to contrast what he experiences as an abstract understanding of the self and the other relation, and this phenomenology of the lived experience. So he says that he thinks that often social sciences, in his time at least, have sought to explain away subjectivity in the name of abstract principles, which act as a kind of dehumanizing. And he suggests that we can't understand ourselves or the other theoretically per se. Only the other can reveal themselves to us. So instead of approaching the other through a theory, they have to reveal themselves to us. And he talks about that through language, through the face. It's a process of revelation. So only the other can speak on their behalf. And I think this contrasts a lot of times in terms of looking at religious experiences. We look at a religious theory of what is happening in a situation. And for Levinas, the theoretical is problematic because the other is always revealing themselves. So we can't approach necessarily through theory. We have to allow the other to reveal themselves to us. So that problem of generalization. We can't generalize about others or understand them based on knowledge about them alone. Because he says what we do there is we limit the other to the identical. That's in God, of God who comes to mind. And he doesn't want us to limit the other to the identical. We're not the same as the other. So saying that someone is identical to us doesn't explain the meaning of the infinite, which he suggests that each person brings with them. And so each person must represent themselves. So this kind of framing of phenomenology as a rupturing in theory, as the self and other engagement, is what he calls ethics. So that the religious experience for him is ethics. It's a different kind of ethics because he doesn't want to go into ethical theory, but it's ethics. It's the responsibility toward the other. It's myself for the other, and this is what constitutes the religious experience. And it emerges in part as a response of the inhumanity of historical events in the 20th century. And he's concerned about how theory in the thematizing of the other can blur the distinction of concrete faces in front of us. And he reflects on the Nazi regime, for instance, and how people can be good theorists and have good theories about human nature and being in general, and ontological kind of constructs, but that doesn't always translate into responsible engagement with the individual face to face. So for him, the religious experience is the face to face rather than being in general. So he's looking for meaning. He's looking for this concept of the holy. He's looking for a religious experience that has meaning after a time of incomprehensible destruction and suffering. And he also wants to be challenging these paradigms of power and violence that he's found problematic, particularly in Heidegger's philosophy. So on this account, he suggests what philosophy needs is not another abstract theory or thematization of a perfect being who can be used to be comprehended and apprehended and dominated. He wants philosophy to breathe differently by bringing the idea of a social proximity as a way of understanding spirituality, meaning, and the holy. And so, of course, what this looks like in particular can be maybe a little bit more challenging, however. Are there any questions about that kind of framing?
Well, I have a lot, but I wanted to ask you, is it okay to ask you a question as you proceed, or would you write to secure? Yeah, okay. So then, if I can ask you then the following, I was reading on Husserl's understanding of the other and the constitution of intersubjectivity as a community of others, and the kind of reduction that Husserl uses in order to arrive at what other contributes as an alien. Husserl uses the term alien as opposed to that which is inherently mine, the sphere of ownness. So, so he uses a reduction to arrive at the contribution of other to consciousness, as opposed to this sphere of ownness at which he arrives by reduction. From how I hear Levinas maintains otherness, there is no reduction of the same kind. It's a very non-Cartesian way, and it feels much closer to the natural form, to the natural attitude. So it's sort of rooted in the natural attitude. While for Husserl, he arrives at this nearly constructed world. And yet at the same time, I know that Levinas is post-Husserlian, and I'm not a Levinas scholar. So if you can comment on that, on the differences, and how Levinas really constitutively conceives other, if at all,
Yeah.
constitutively. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to look at that process of understanding the other in a moment.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. For he does.
Anna, sound, please move again closer to the mic. Yeah.
Levinas,
Okay.
Levinas does speak about there is a Cartesian element in terms of how he
Uh-huh.
speaks infinite. So the infinite that comes to mind rather than through mind. That's a very Cartesian. That's his reference to Descartes, and so there is that Cartesian element, but the reduction doesn't happen in Levinas as far as I'm aware, as opposed to Husserl in terms, because for Levinas it's the process of revelation. The
Oh, I
other,
see. Mm-hmm.
there is the idea of the stranger and the alien. He does reference the other as the stranger and the alien, and
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of a biblical reference as well. Um, but it's the stranger and the alien, but who is revealing themselves to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is his idea of, is the way he holds revelation, is it similar to givenness in Marion, or it's something different? Is it
Yeah,
passive?
I think it's slightly different.
It
Yeah,
is different. Okay.
yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
could stand corrected, but I think
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. And then sound again, keep, please.
yeah.
Yeah.
Keep.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So for philosophy, for Levinas, is ethics. So it's enacted in the bones. It's lived out between people. And now people, I don't want to make Levinas normative. There's kind of a resistance to kind of put Levinas in normative language. And I know that I often do that, and I need to be aware of that. But it is the ethics that he's developing is one that is embodied between people.
Mm-hmm.
So his ethics can't be read as a system, but rather it's more of a conversation between people. He's interested in how we experience life in relation to other distinct selves. So what's happening here is we have two people in conversation, and this is what his ethics is, but they're separate. So in order for this conversation to happen, there has to be a separation between the people, between the selves. So the selves are actually distinct. The self and the other are distinct, and they have a specific sensible life that is subject to the call of the other. So this interaction between these two separate selves is what enables the ethical life to emerge, the ethical encounter. And this is what Levinas refers to as the first philosophy, because the rest of philosophy rests on this relationship, this relation
Mm-hmm.
of response and responsibility between the self and the other. So for Levinas, there's a separation that preconditions almost this ethical encounter, and he talks about this atheism of the separate self that is contained within itself. So kind of prior to this religious experience of dialogue between the self and the other, the self exists as separate. And the self exists as separate and enjoying the sensible life. So they see food and they consume it, and they enjoy the sensible life. And this is this kind of self as ego, as enclosed, as enjoying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only in the encounter with the other that the self becomes a subject. So the self is in its ego, it's self-contained, it's enjoying the sensible world, but it's not a subject, and it only becomes a subject through this revelation of the other. And so it's an expressive position, Critchley writes, of myself facing the other. It's a performative doing that can't be reduced to a propositional description. And so he's describing kind of an active exchange between people that can't be theoretically represented because it's being experienced. So trying to understand this exchange and what's happening in this exchange is the basis of Levinas's phenomenology. And so here we have the self contained in itself, and it hears from outside of its kind of sphere of goodness and enjoyment, it hears this call, and it's this call of the other. And in this hearing the call and this response to this call of the other, the self becomes the subject of the other. So there's the sensible experience, and then there's this exposure to the embodiment of the other, and that's in which we become a subject. And this is a sensible person who's vulnerable to pain and suffering, passive in one description, passive to the openings of pain and pangs of hunger and eros. And it's this being who is central to the ethical exchange. It's the embodied being. So the subject feels and lives as part of her experience. She's capable of loving others. She has needs that need to be fed and cared for. And this is this being that Levinas situates it in. And so philosophy is a means of kind of understanding this situatedness. It's, as phenomenology, it's what Levinas calls the science de naïveté. It's a study of what we engage with normally, a work of reflection that's brought to bear on our unreflective everyday life, and it's a reminder of things that we continuously pass over and haven't reflected on. Okay. So Levinas sees phenomenology as a way of finding structured meaning without generalizing systems, and this is revealed in the face to face. We don't ask just how we know what we know, but we must understand the meaning behind what we know. And it's not moral theory per se, it's also not ontology, but it's this lived revelation. And so I want to situate this kind of this phenomenology as this idea of the face to face. And so here I want to look at how religious experience can be understood through Levinas's relational phenomenology, where the other presents herself to us as a face. This face that the other presents themselves to us as cannot be understood from the outside. So we can't say, okay, I have knowledge about you, therefore I understand you. You are, young, male, so da 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 da. From this background, therefore I know your religious experience is going to be X. Religious experience is this continuous unfolding, and the other has to reveal herself to me. And the face is what does this. The face reveals itself, and it reveals itself through language. And the relation between the subject and the other is there for this one of ethics. Now, Levinas seems to present a kind of a universalized Jewish formulation of the human subject. So he says he wants to present a universal philosophy. He's distinguishing his theology from his philosophy, but there's a distinct kind of Jewish formulation of this philosophy. So it's applying to all people, but there seems to be this distinct kind of Jewishness that's a part of it. And the other person, as I've said before, becomes a subject as they respond to the other. And it's a response to a unique face that can't be understood from the outside. So there's no same experience. There's no same religious experience. There's a unique experience, and this is the uniqueness of the face that also translates into the uniqueness of the religious experience. So Levinas suggests that we relate to human beings differently than we relate to objects. So objects, for instance, a loaf of bread, I see it, I need it, it fills a need, I'm hungry, I consume it. That's done. But you can't do that with human beings. They exist in a different relation. So whereas we need something, we consume it, becomes a part of us, the other human being exists separate from us and cannot be consumed. And so there's a different relationship that develops, a different relation. We can't comprehend them, and so we can't consume them. And so what he says, instead of this idea of this need relation, it's this relation of desire. So the religious relation is a relation of desire for the other. We relate to the other through infinitely desiring them. So the other is irreducibly other to us, so alien to us, separate. And yet, there has to be something that I can relate to. So they contain a face that I recognize and language in which I can communicate to them. And they can communicate, most importantly, they can communicate to me. It's more about them than about me. And Levinas ties this to the relation to God. So both the other and God contain an infinite height, an irreducibility. And this is kind of this Cartesian infinite. Both rupture any notion of the same. So there are no two same two same human beings. They rupture the notion of the same. As human beings, sensing and perceiving, our experience of God is through phenomenon, and for Levinas, our experience of God is through vis-a-vis the other, the face of the other. So metaphysics and this experience of God, he classifies as this metaphysics, is an experience of the phenomenon, but it's the phenomenon of the face of the other. It's the face-to-face relation. And I just want to kind of unpack that a little bit more in terms of the word, the face-to-face, the understanding of the face, and the Hebrew for face, which is panim, and panim al panim. And I thought there was an interesting kind of parallel that could be seen in which Levinas explores the face-to-face of the subject and the other And this is where the religious is encountered, because we can't understand the other. The other contains is infinitely beyond us, and we access God through the other. And if we look at kind of the Hebrew scriptures, and you go to Genesis, and you have this encounter, there's Gabriel Brown, a scholar, reminds us of the story of Jacob and Esau. And Jacob encounters God, or encounters the angel and wrestles with the angel, and is renamed Israel. And in Genesis 32, verse 31, says, Jacob called the place Paniel, the face of God, because I have seen God face to face, yet my life is spared. So there's this face to face with God and Jacob. And then a chapter later, this experience of the panim, the face to face, is echoed in the encounter with his estranged brother a few verses on, when we see this repetition of the image where Jacob is reconciled with his estranged brother, and he thinks it's going to go quite badly. Jacob says, when he sees his brother Esau, he says, just seeing your face has been like seeing the face of God. So here we have the parallel of this face to face, seeing God face to face, panim el panim, and then seeing the human face to face. And so bringing this parallel to the face of Esau, his brother, we see an intimate connection between the face of the individual human and the face of God. Not that it's the same, there's a rupture in the same, but there's this kind of parallel that's happening in this experience. And some Jewish commentators have suggested that this is just a way of Jacob sucking up to Esau and saying, oh, you look just like God. But you could kind of look at a more nuanced understanding of it. So even in this, we can see traces of this idea of the human face as containing traces of this God face, or this human relation of the face to face, as containing traces of the human God relation, or the religious relation. And one can perhaps allude to the Jewish kind of tradition where the inner person, the soul, is received as a divine spark from God, where the image of God is revealed through the forming of humanity. So Rabbi Liadi talks about the divine spark ensouled in the inner person. So as we encounter the other, we see this divine spark. This is the divine spark that is ensouled in the inner person. So in the concrete features of the face, in the chin, in the eyes, in the lips, in the nose, somehow in this phenomenon, this encounter, we have the face-to-face encounter of two people, but then we have this face-to-face encounter with a trace of God as well. So Levinas really wants to explore this further. He wants to explore how the religious experience is the relation to the other. So religious experience is this the phenomenon of seeing another person and engaging with another person. And so he's really boiling metaphysics. So he's talking about metaphysics, but it's not kind of an abstract metaphysics. It's a concrete metaphysics of ethics. In Totality and Infinity, which is one of his earlier books right here, Levinas writes that we propose to call religion the bond that is established between the same and the other without constituting a totality. So what does that mean? Levinas is doing two things. First, he's equating the religious, that is the experience of God, to an experience via the human experience through phenomenon. Secondly, he's suggesting that this self-other experience, this religious experience, is completely distinct from other experiences. So each face, each encounter is different. We can't generalize the encounter. Each face and each encounter is different and ruptures any sense the same. Each religious experience is irreducibly unique, just like the human face. So we've got this uniqueness. But the word panim contains also in it a richness, because it's at once a word for one thing, the face, while also containing the plurality of an ending. So panim is the face, but it's also faces, with the I am ending. And so why is this? Why is there this kind of small detail? I would argue that in the uniqueness and the rupturing of each encounter, the plurality is also maintained in a unity. There's not a sameness or a totality, but there's an overarching relation, the overarching relation between the self and the other. So there's a uniqueness in each panim el panim, but then there's also this overarching metaphysical relation of the infinite relation. So there's this kind of overarching infinite while also being the uniqueness of each faith. And Brown, who's a scholar on Levinas, writes that the parts of the human face are the epiphany of a holy language, according to Levinas. The infinite combinations of these features create a perfectly unique face, and this uniqueness is the holy. So for Levinas, philosophy is not the love of wisdom, but the wisdom of love. And this wisdom of love situates the God relation in the face-to-face encounter with the human other. So Levinas is explaining holiness in terms of the ethical relation to the other. In Totality and Infinity, he refers to this as this new metaphysics, and a metaphysics that opens up a dimension of height through the relation to the other. The relation to a human other is where the subject encounters the infinite within the lived experience. And there's also the sense in which there's a height because the relation is always there. There's always a response. There's for Levinas, we're always responsible. We're always responding. We're always responsible to the other. So the height is an infinite height because we're always responding. Levinas is developing Descartes' idea of the infinite, which comes from beyond us and is exceeding our understanding. It's produced from the exchange with the other, and it's a process of revelation. So the other, the human other, contains more than my capacity and breaks through my capacity to understand them. And so this face reveals an infinite obligation, and it also, in this infinite obligation towards the other, it reveals this God relation as a trace. Mm-hmm. But the phenomenon cannot be fully revealed or comprehended in relation. So Elliot Wolfson writes that the face of the other, which is manifest in the voice that comes from another shore, teaches about transcendence and the presence of infinity, breaking the closed circle of totality. So the face of the other, we have the face, but then the face is speaking. The face is speaking, and it comes from what she calls it, another shore, and it's teaching us about transcendence rather than immanence. There's this transcendence that Levinas beckons us to. And She actually, Elliot Wolfson actually suggests that this idea of panim, this face-to-face, is actually a post-phenomenological phenomenology that shows the inadequacy of simply understanding the other through phenomenon, through the face itself. So the face is revealed through phenomenology as the place of revelation. But it's this ongoing expression and needs language to be communicated.
Mm-hmm.
This, I think, sits with the Hebrew understanding of panim, which is the same word for both the external and the inner experience. So panim represents both the external face, but also the inner experience of that being. So the external appearance almost reveals the inner space. So the panim is both the face that presents itself in the phenomenon, but then it also kind of echoes this otherwise than this infinite that cannot be contained just by facial features. Yeah, the encounter with one face reveals both the phenomenon of the face, but it also reveals this surplus, this infinite that we can't comprehend, that ruptures our understanding of that person. It reveals the alterity suggested in totality and infinity that does not shine forth in the form by which things are given to us, and as such is the vision of the very openness of being that cuts across the visions of forms. It is the face, but its revelation is speech. So the face as a form, it reveals, opens us up to more than the form, if that makes sense. And it opens us up towards revelation, which happens in the speech, which happens in the language. So this face reveals the incomprehensible nature of the presence of the other. And it's engaging with this face that the religious experience unfolds for Levinas. And I just want to stop there for just a brief second. Just wondered if people had just kind of any questions about that.
Okay, so yeah, any questions or comments, please? Okay. Because okay, if everybody is silent, then I'll ask you again. Is that all right, Anna? Yeah. Okay. So I am familiar with a very different interpretation of Levinas, and I don't know if that's a difference between theology and psychology, or more kind of analytically oriented psychology, but that difference, it's different not in substance, but I would say in a tone, rather. Rather than face being a revelation and then being a window into the whole world behind, which is communicated to me through speech, etc. Face is a disruption. It's like, I'm living in my bubble, and then so I constructed a comfortable picture of reality, and then the other appears as a sort of a disruptor, and there is this face which is coming at me. And in contemporary reality, contemporary world, social world, that's often the case, especially in politics, in war, in the situations of adversity, or genocide, of course, being the horrible example of disruption. And so does Levinas talk about it? Is this the horrific side of God, or would it be something wrong with a human being, or to what degree it is innate to how things are, and to what degree it is ethics going bad, or
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So he also changes slightly how he frames things in his philosophy.
Sound, come closer.
So
Yeah.
in total. So a lot of what I've looked at in this has been from totality and infinity,
Mhm.
and he talks about welcoming the face as an experience of welcome, of hospitality, of giving, and which is really nice. But then
Yeah.
he also has later on in his work, he also references this the face is actually taking me hostage, and
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, and so that's also the other side of the face is this demand, and it's
Mhm.
rupturing into myself, and it won't go away. And so
Mhm.
there is that definitely that kind of more of a gritty, a violence done
Mhm.
onto you by the face. Yeah, so there's kind of both. I think there's both sides to that. in terms of in terms of how we respond,
Mhm.
he talks about in kind of in useless suffering, for instance. He talks about
Mhm.
this experience of suffering and the embodied pain of suffering,
Mhm.
and he doesn't talk so much about pain being done to the self by the other,
Mhm.
but rather he talks about this experience of suffering and says it's useless in and of itself, but
Mhm.
it only has meaning when I respond to the other's call. So when I enter into the pain of the other and provide an exit out of that pain and that suffering, then there's this meaning to that experience. So I'm hearing the call of the other, and I'm actually risking my life for the other to take them out of their
Mhm.
pain.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
that's kind of, so
Mhm.
for him it's always us being responsible for the other,
Mhm.
even when they take me hostage. And so it's
Mhm.
this, and this is kind of this demandingness of Levinas that kind of is so intense, really.
Mhm.
Yeah, but yeah, definitely it's not just the welcoming of the nice face. Yeah.
Okay.
So in a little bit in lines of what you're saying there, Olga, and I think I understand you to be saying, Anna, is that whole, you talked about desirability, and he has I can't remember where he writes this, but he talks about the desire for God. And as you mentioned, the only really access to religious experience, to the divine, is through the face of the other, which many times is he calls undesirable, which was in a very poetic way that the English translation was really good. This undesirability. So we approach the desirable through the demand of this undesirable face. And I found that perhaps, Olga, what you're referring to there, and then what you clarified as well, Anna.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That is so beautiful. And I think because he's contrasting the holy with the sacred. So this kind of, he really wants to challenge this idea of us kind of communing with God in a way that we feel at one with God, and we have this kind of this connectedness with the presence of God. And for him, it very much is this holiness is distinction, holiness is separation, and it comes vis-a-vis the face of the other, which and I think that might tie into that as well, that he really wants to contrast that sacred with the holy. Yeah.
Can can I ask you then maybe to clarify a little bit more here? The holiness in the other, it's affective also. It's a feeling rather than an idea of the holy. Or the reason I'm asking is that let's say if other is disruptive or the negative emotion rises, is that also related to holiness, or will it be falling into the how to understand it, how to understand his vision? Maybe simplistic questions, but
no, that's interesting. He talks about the relevance of emotion, but in terms of the holy, it feels like it's holiness is responsibility, is response, and it's kind of regardless of emotion, regardless of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely makes sense, and it's also a very Jewish traditional look at things. I must say it's, but in Judaism it goes together with the unknownness of God. But Levinas says that God is revealing himself right through the other, so the unknownness is taken away. But it's not the feeling, but rather this ongoing revelation, which is sanctified. Or is that something correct?
Yes, I would
And
say
come
that.
closer.
I think the revelation of God is this It's this ethical revelation. So you only experience God in the trace, that kind of trace that's left behind, and there's this. He has a kind of a and people don't talk about his kind of phenomenology of creation a lot, but it's this God that withdraws himself from creation, and so it's kind of God that's not there, that has, but that reveals himself as a trace as well. So it's that but not a felt presence necessarily, except through the that.
I know scholars who transitioned, well, at least one very prominent translator of Vedantic poetry transitioned into Judaism, and Berliner. In Vedanta, God is completely found within subjectivity through, let's say, maximum reduction in the residue. The transcendental ego will be basically equated to God and connected with religious feeling. So here it seems like it's a completely different take on things. And I'm just wondering, and that's an open question, of course, how do people reconcile those two very different perspectives? Do they ever meet? But this is more a rhetorical question. Just an observation.
I wonder if they. I don't know that I have the answer. I wonder
Come close to the mic, please.
I wonder if they reveal themselves through just the common human experience.
Well, either that or I think that maybe the sense of the sacred within subjectivity is actually the hallmark of the beginning experiences, but then it wears off, and then maybe that's where people start looking for the sacred in a completely different domain. Yeah.
So I have a comment, actually. I'm really interested in this area, and I had considered looking at Levinas's take on the face in my dissertation so I'm studying the lived body made meaningful through family relatedness and family history. And one of the interesting things about it is that when I have found some scholars, actually sociologists, talking about, oh, we're looking at kinship and we're looking at recognition and resemblance in family members, and there is always something mysterious there and always something ethereal is actually the word that was used. And yet it's strange, because if we look at a family member, we expect to recognize them. We expect to even see a part of ourselves in them, or some sort of reflection, to look for ourselves in another person, to see some kind of a reflection back of our own self. And yet there's something so mysterious, and it accounts for the fascination that people have with family history and in looking at photos of family members and ancestors and trying to see similarities between family members. And I think what you said here about Levinas's take on the revealing of the incomprehensible nature of the other it fits really well into that. And I think some of these other researchers I've been studying are speaking to that without using the phenomenological language. And so it makes me it further convinces me that there's an eidetic here of a revealing of the holy through the other that remains mysterious, that has this ethereal feeling to it, even when we are with people we know and we feel so intimately connected with, down to our blood and our materiality. So that's just a comment, and it makes me excited to keep going in that direction.
That's fascinating. That's so fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah.
I think Levinas because he does also talks about this the stranger and the alien and this kind of the other that we don't understand, but he also talks about it in terms of family and this relation of revelation, which he ties. I think it's really that kind of the Jewish rabbinical kind of the teacher and the pupil and kind of, but the teacher also receiving from the pupil is part of this revelation. And he talks about the father and the son, and so there is that connection and that resemblance that enables people to communicate. But then it's also the foreign, and even the son and the father are the self and the other that is completely other, which I think,
exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, this is Karen. I don't know if you can hear me. I had trouble unmuting my microphone, but
oh, hi, Karen.
Hello. I wanted to make a response somewhat to what Olga was saying. In the Jewish tradition, God is unknowable, but in the early Christian tradition, Jesus was seen as revealing the face of the Father. That was his great gift that he was offering. And of course, he was a person who was known by other people. So they did see his face, they heard his voice. Also, in the South Indian tradition that I've gotten involved in the last 30 years or so, there's a wonderful long prayer to the Divine Mother that's called the Lalita Sahasranamam, and many of the names relate to her face, the features of her face. Her nose is like the bud of a certain type of flower. They talk about the peerless quality of her chin, and they go all through her entire body, observing, the different parts and comparing them to things from nature and commenting on the beauty of her body and her face and her hair. And also they put a lot of emphasis on the voice. So when I hear you talking about Levinas's emphasis on voice and on face, I'm thinking, wow, this makes so much sense. When I first encountered this tradition, I thought, why are they making such a big deal about the voice and the face? But there is so much there, obviously. Also, the Vedantic notion that the religious experience takes place in subjectivity is also complemented by the Vedantic emphasis on the guru. The guru is a face and is a voice that you are relating to. And that face and that voice opens up something inside you so that you want to respond in a positive way. You want to be a better person. You want to, in the case of the woman that I follow, you want to give more, do more for the poor and things like that. So there is a responsiveness that comes to the face and the voice that speaks to you. So that is part of the Vedantic tradition as well. So just a comment, maybe a little off the topic, but I thought it was kind of the prime moment to speak up on that. So
that is fascinating. I didn't realize. That's very interesting.
yes.
I think,
Well,
yeah, thank you so much. I hadn't heard that before. That's fascinating.
It's a little bit off on another subject, maybe, but it
Well,
relates.
no, plurality of religious experiences.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Thank you.
I think that the notion of Jesus is also a fascinating one, where the kind of the other becomes something. The infinite becomes something of phenomenal, and that is something actually I'd be really interested in looking at further. Is the face of Jesus in kind of looking at Levinas, and how that would be an interesting
It runs
that
through
revelation.
Yes, it runs through Christian tradition in a small way, and you can definitely find references to it in Catholicism and also in that novel, The Doll Maker. The main character is trying to carve the face of Jesus from a piece of a fallen tree, and so it's an interesting tradition. And also he must have had a face and a voice that were very very evocative for people, for him to have become such a major figure, historically. But then people took it and they kind of made it a little bit more abstract because they no longer had his actual face and voice, right? But in the beginning, that face and that voice were there and made a huge impression on people.
Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating. What I kind of wanted to do at this point is kind of tie this kind of this mapping onto so this is actually a perfect transition for that, into the plurality of religious experiences. So how can we understand Panim? How can we understand this Levinasian understanding of the face, the revelation of the face, in terms of religious experiences? And this came kind of out of a few conversations I'd had with people where there was a sense in certain religious contexts that you have one particular way of encountering God, and that is the way you check, and then you've encountered the infinite. And this was difficult for others because they had thought they'd encountered the infinite, but they hadn't checked box 1 and 2, and were they actually believers and all this kind of stuff.
This is exact. This is perfect. Yeah, really.
So I just thought, well, you know what? I just feel like this Levinas might have something to say about this. So for Levinas, you have the face. Insofar as a person experiences God, a person experiences the unique face of the other. So the face-to-face, each person encounters the face of God vis-a-vis the face of the other. And this face is unique, is completely unique. And so each revelation with the infinite is a completely unique revelation. And Levinas has told us how he really doesn't want to theorize, have a general theory about the religious or the encounter with the holy. Instead, it's this particularization of each revelation. And I just thought that was really interesting in terms of how we understand religious experience. So there's the face. So there's a few things going on. The face to face, we've got the self becomes a subject through the revelation of the other. So that self becomes itself really through this revelation of response to the other. But it's completely unique in each circumstance. And the other has to reveal themselves to the self in order for them to become a subject, and it's unique and distinct in each case. And if we're looking at the word panim, we've got this word which represents the exterior, the phenomenal, but then it also represents the inner. And so we have this face-to-face that shows itself, but then it also doesn't show itself. So it's never completely comprehended. And so I just thought this is really interesting when we're considering religious experience, when we're considering how we're even speaking about religious experience. Can we have a general religious experience? And when we're kind of theorizing about this is what a religious experience is, how can we even do that? Even though we almost need to do that, how can we do that in a meaningful way in terms of an experience of revelation? So each face that encounters the other, and if we're talking about the religious experience of encountering God, each face that encounters God reveals there's a different revelation that happens. There's a different communication that happens. But then the face is also kind of a united whole. So the face reveals itself in a particularity, but then there must also be this sense of something that unites the whole. There's a plurality, but then there's also the whole face. There's the face in the faces. It's one word. And I was just thinking, kind of anecdotally, I had a little story. So imagine a weekly religious meeting. You have these black-backed seats that fill quickly. Some people come in and they kneel on the ground. Others are quietly sitting. Some are standing tall. Others are bent and weeping. And there's each of these people, each of these individuals represent kind of a phenomenological expression of a revelation with God. Is there one that is the religious experience? Is there one that is the revelation? Or is it that they're all unique revelations, and that is what is the religious experience, is that it is a plurality of revelations. And yet, as they articulate themselves, particularly in a context of like a weekly religious meeting, there's a plurality, but then there's also a collective. So there's the face of the individual, but then the faces that reveal the singular.
Okay. And Anna,
that are
voice.
happening
Yeah.
as a collective. The singular face is also panim plural, and these singular revelations. Sorry.
There was a couple of disruptions of sound exactly when you are unpacking your thoughts, so you may want to repeat a little bit what you just
Okay.
conveyed.
Hear me
Try.
now?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
No,
I'm
it's
sorry about the network.
it's not you. It's the network. It's Zoom, I think. Does it? Okay.
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 So the idea of the panim, the word panim being the face, but then faces, and we've got this idea of, if we have, for instance, a weekly religious meeting, we have different expressions, phenomena of this encounter. We've got different faces, but then the collective face being itself a religious experience. So we've got the singular religious experiences, but then collectively we've got the collective religious experience, and there being that paradox almost being what comprises the religious experience. As each face is expressing themselves and revealing themselves, they're revealing a part of the self experience, but then collectively there's also the collective revealing that reveals something, the nature, the relation of God. And those are kind of just my thoughts on that, and I'd love to kind of develop that further. But I was wondering kind of what you might think about that, the kind of maybe the limitations of that, because if we're all having collective experience, what is the actual religious experience that we're talking about, or what could be the strengths? I just kind of wanted to open up that.
Okay, that's yeah. Let me just comment. It's a very lovely idea with which I resonate a lot. I did research on a very longitudinal study for 10 plus years on sort of developmental stages of religious experience, observing people in different religious practices for many years. And it's absolutely clear that the experience can involve any region of experience. So it can be religious emotion, it can be religious sense of space, it can be religious communion with others, it can be in the collective, it can be individual, etc. So all those experiences will have a denominator of being religious, but that is not an interpretation. This is something which is built into experience itself. And that's pretty much the idea in William James, of course. Except for Ott tries to distill that ingredient, but I don't know to what degree his distillation is successful. But the truth is that as all those experiences kind of accumulate and they're different, they contribute to the change of knowledge. The idea of God changes down the road, so the revelation accumulates itself. And we tried actually, Courtney and myself, in our recent introduction to the volume, to the issue of open theology, to reflect the same idea in a more phenomenological language, as conceptualizing the region of religious experiencing as crossing over all other spheres and regions of the psyche, rather than having specifically kind of limited conditions of possibility of its own, but it's sort of like it can open up, it pervades the whole human being, and that's why we're having such a plurality. So it's not exactly what you are saying, but it's a similar idea, I think, or close idea. So maybe I was thinking that maybe I should we should or can send you the introduction, and it may be of interest to, just to throw back and forth some pieces of writing. Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah. And then, it's also resonates. There are some traditions which establish certain criteria of, let's say, enlightenment. For example, unless you meet this and this and this categories of experience, then it's not the right experience, and then therefore you cannot be certified as a completed or enlightened person. And in that sense, I think that perhaps there is a difference, a very big difference between what we mean by what is religious experience and a kind of human completion, which is posted in experience-oriented paths. So something going on there which needs to be sorted out differently, because I think that the nature of things is much closer to how you describe it, rather than those specific experience-based criteria. Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment on this also. I've been reflecting on when I go to see Amma, who probably many of you have heard of her. She's called the Hugging Saint. She has, hundreds and thousands of people coming to the programs. And so it's been a real opportunity to reflect on the individual nature of each person's religious and spiritual experience. So I started 30 years ago when I was younger, and I would see people that I thought they don't seem religious or spiritual to me at all. Why are they here? I had a lot of judgment about them. And, as the years have gone by, I've watched them continue to be part of our community and do all sorts of wonderful things and change, as we all have. So it's been a meditation in action on this very principle that you're bringing up about the uniqueness of and the diversity of religious experience. So one of the things I've noticed in my studies is that even though Hindu philosophy, Vedanta, and so forth puts a lot of emphasis on the absolute, they also have a principle that every jiva, or every soul, is absolutely unique. So these two principles are there kind of in tandem. You've got the absolute, but you've also got all these millions and billions. There's no number that could calculate the number of individual jivas, because everything that's alive, and that includes all the micro, the small little critters in the world and so forth, everything has its own jiva in this particular system. So it's kaleidoscopic, and it's quite infinite. So it's an interesting concept.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's fascinating, and I think that's interesting what you mentioned about the kind of initial, that kind of journey, and that journey of revelation almost.
Yes,
that it doesn't necessarily always fit a specific kind of static theory of how it ought to be, and allowing for this kind of this individual revelation process to continue as a kind of a conversation, being so important in individuals' kind of religious experiences.
Yes, my mother had a concept called ongoing revelation.
Huh.
She was part of some little Gnostic group in her youth. I think that's where she got the idea. Ongoing revelation. I said, Mom, that's not really Catholic, but
maybe in some branches.
later in her life, she became a Catholic. So, okay, sorry for the diversion there.
Thank you, Anna, for what you've said about the individuality of the Herim, of the Panim, but also the communality, the interesting, because I was just thinking how I think Levinas himself would be coming from, the people, the community, a strong tradition of in Jewish theology of the people. And I guess where we maybe come closest to that in the Christian tradition, especially I think in the mainline and in the apostolic traditions, is the liturgy, where really the liturgy is looked upon as this entire communal experience of God as a community. So thank you for pointing that out.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. I think I don't want to generalize Nigel Zimmerman's, but when he's talking about John Paul II and Levinas, that kind of concept of the body and what does that look like as participating in the body, and the other. I think he references that those elements such as the liturgy and the and partaking of the body of Christ, and such things. But that's really fascinating. Yeah. Thank you. I don't have. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes, so far so good, yes.
Great. Okay. I don't have much more to add to that, but I just wanted to kind of tie up what we've been talking about, really, just in terms of, for Levinas, the religious experience is the self and the other. So God is encountered, that transcendent isn't necessarily immanent, but that transcendent being is encountered through the trace, through this revelation of the other. And the other isn't reducible to the same as me, and yet I can communicate to them and I can communicate with them. And so they reveal themselves to me. So I can't confront them with this is who you are, but they must speak on their own behalf. And I am responding to them. And I think just in terms of looking at religious experiences and existing, I think kind of ecumenically and communally, this idea of holding these revelations as the one face revealing itself, and the multiple, the plurality of faces representing these revelations can be a kind of powerful way of looking at phenomenology of religious experience. Yeah. And what I think is interesting for Levinas, and I think this is quite Jewish, is that he ties it into this is ethics. And so it's very much a part of the phenomenal. It's treating people well, it's feeding your neighbor. It's this kind of really tangible revelational process. It's not just about language kind of showing a lovely kind of self, like a poetic self-concept, but it's about saying, I'm really hungry, feed me, and the person gets bread, and that's the holy, and that's the religious as well. And I think there's something powerful in that as well. Yeah, a revelation of the other as an embodied other with needs and kind of material needs as well, brings the religious into a conversation of justice.
I love this notion that you just brought forth. Yesterday I went to a soup kitchen and I had the experience of seeing the faces of the hungry. And, it was one of those special days where everybody was feeling good, I think, because the richness of the personalities was able to come out on the faces of people, despite the fact that they live in extreme deprivation. So you could see the soul, you could see the richness of the personality. And so I know this is not part of a philosophical discussion, what I'm saying right now, but it relates to what you're saying. So
It's very Levinasian.
Yes, I think so. I'm loving Levinas, or I'm not sure how to say his name correctly, but I'm loving him. Thank you so much for sharing, Anna.
Oh, thank you, Karen. Thank you so much.
I just had a question quickly about, you said you were using Carell's method. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that
Yeah.
how do you spell the name?
It's Javi Carell, Carel, and she's at University of Bristol.
Okay, yeah.
She develops an existential phenomenology of illness, and does a lot of work with Merleau-Ponty. But she's fascinating, where she talks about how do we talk about our embodiment when our embodiment is this restrictive thing, and
Right.
how do we talk? Yeah, so yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. And I just wondered if there were kind of, I'm sorry that I haven't gone to the full 2 hours, but I just wondered if there were any kind of final thoughts that people might have.
It's nobody goes to full 2 hours in the series. I mean, we're getting, people sometimes talk for 20 minutes and it doesn't. Yeah, I'm sorry I gave this impression maybe, but we're having a very, very substantial conversation, so it's rewarding, I hope. Well, I'm trying to kind of understand and position what you shared in myself, and in terms of ethics. So Levinasian ethics is not normative. It's not normative, right? Is that correct?
He doesn't want to reduce it to a theory.
Okay, yeah.
But
So,
it does have normative implications. So that's
how do you establish connection with normativity? What's the where is the normative in this? Or where is normativity situated? Yeah, if at all.
Yeah, I think normativity would be in the response we give to the other.
Aha, okay.
So that's the only part of the normativity, I would say.
And what about choice? How does choice come into it? How does he see? Yeah. That's just good questions, right?
Just a little bit. He preconditions. He says, for him, in terms of freedom, he says freedom is ordered by relation. So
oh my God.
First philosophy is responsibility and response, and through that that preconditions our freedom. So in terms of choice, the other confronts us, and we don't necessarily, we're held hostage to them. So that choice is I mean, maybe we have some kind of, we don't have to listen to them, but we're still hearing them, and so there is not a lot of room for choice.
So would it be correct to say that he decenters intentionality, if at all? I mean, yeah, and I just knew very little about Levinas, limited to secondary sources, of course, as a part of French phenomenology, which I like and study, and then it's and also his writings on Husserl's theory of intentionality. So I'm trying to see the cusp first, and of course Husserl's understanding of intentionality is that it's a constitutive activity of the ego, if I can say so. But here even choice or all intentional acts will be already linked to the presence of the other, in a sense, like a priori, before the subjectivity is even posited, it seems. Is that true or no? Yeah. Okay.
from my understanding of Levinas, I think that is true. I mean, you can
That
have the
okay.
you have that ego, that pre-reflective ego that
Mm-hmm.
exists, pleasure, but that's not a subject. And so
Right. Yeah, understand. And the unity of the subject will be in that pre-reflective ego, or how do you, because others are many, and then you talk about plurality and unification, and we offered you a very kind of empirical response to that. But how does he conceive then unity? Like, why does the thing hold together?
Yeah. So
What?
he sees unity in the separate being. So I think he really, some scholars have suggested that he presupposes the Kierkegaardian subject. So he presupposes the separate self. And so for him, we start as this separate being who's autonomous and satisfied, and this is what he calls the atheism, the atheistic self that doesn't need anyone, but you only become a subject. So you're contained, you have needs, and so you're the embodied, but you're not a subject, and you're only a subject in that relational activity. So you exist as separate.
So would it be possible to say that the subject acquires depth, that the subject acquires internal depth through others? Is that consistent with his vision?
And becoming, basically becoming themselves, becoming
Becoming
it's a part of your human experience.
Human, becoming a human, yeah. Not an animal. Okay. Well, it's thank you, and it's open to. We have some time yet to ask questions and continue discussion, and it's very interesting to have a Levinasian scholar in the circle, because we were so heavily stationed in Husserlian kind of discourse, with leaning to French phenomenology, some of us like Henri, and so it was between Husserl and Henri primarily. But it's absolutely great to talk to you, because it's just such a different world of understanding.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, and thank you for each of the discussion. I've really valued that. I found that very, very enriching. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So does anybody have questions or comments? Because I will be otherwise asking again, and that's I don't want to do.
It's okay, Olga.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's fine, Olga. But I was just going to mention, Anna, when you talked about Levinas talking about the stranger and the alien, and the face of the other in terms of stranger and alien. He, I think, I'm not sure on this, but I think at one point he actually uses the Hebrew word herim, which is stranger or foreigner, or just got 1,000,001 translations. But recently, theologians who have worked with in migrant reality have begun translating it as migrant. They think it's better. Which just a comment that with Pope Francis's emphasis on the migrant as representing really in many ways the poor, and of course part of those, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, or the migrant. So I found that really interesting. I think Levinas, when he was talking with, which he did often, I guess, his Jewish community, used that term. So interesting.
Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. And I think he too was a migrant.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, and in a way, the migrant experience is very basic to human life, isn't it? I mean, people
Yeah.
have moved around a lot throughout
Yes.
time, and so
Mhm.
our attitude to it right now politically is kind of strange, considering the universality of migration.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay. Anna, one more question on my side. Um, again in Levinas's understanding of ethics, is there a reference to internal state or any concept of internal state? The reason I'm asking is that the work that I'm doing now is on early Zoroastrian scriptures, and in the corpus called the Gathas, which is the original Zoroastrian revelation, and Zoroastrianism is probably the oldest organized living religion. So in the Gathas, early on, there is a reference to the good mind. So the essence of revelation is ethical, and in this revelation, Zoroaster, who has nothing to do with the Nietzschean figure, because Nietzsche is rather a parody on the historical Zoroaster. So Zoroaster or Zarathustra is a dream in which two spirits talk to one another, and it's not clear if these are spirits like subtle world entities or impetus, but they make different choices, and one of them makes a good choice and the other makes a bad choice, and out of a good choice God arises in his dream, and God is has some qualities which are at the same time God's and human beings, and one of those qualities is good mind, which is clearly an internal state or quality of some kind, because it's not defined, and it's also charged. This good mind is charged eschatologically, because those who cultivate good mind attain salvation in this eschatology. So it's like the first ethics which has a reference to internal state, and as I understand, there is a bunch of ethics which I, again, not a specialist in, but there is a branch of ethics which takes internal state as a ground of departure. So that's a long detour, but I if he at all in this emphasis on otherness and interactions that we have, okay, what is the measurement of interaction? Is it a subjectively lived experience? If it's not the prescriptive ethics, then how do we know that we do good? Like, let's say, it's to boil it down. How do we know that the other is happy? If we even sometimes, cannot clearly even read the non-verbals, or does happiness count at all in this situation? And
Huh. I
I
that's
mean,
something I need to I think I need to look into further, to be honest. I think for him, we're talking about an embodied phenomenology. It's very much about the body, so the body that's capable of pain, of suffering.
is that good or bad when the body is I mean, bad?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So he says life is love of life. So for him, we want to enjoy life is for enjoyment, and
Uh-huh.
and to enjoy ourselves as bodies in the world
Uh-huh.
alongside us. And so this disruption of suffering, which kind of totalizes and encompasses us, is not what we want. And so we want to get out of that, and
Uh-huh.
that's where the ethical encounter of kind of happens. In terms of happiness,
Uh-huh.
um, it's the I think he would reference happiness of enjoyment. So you'd have happiness of enjoying, your physical body,
Uh-huh. Okay.
that being part of the separate being, the separate self, and kind of presupposing that for your ethical relations. And we know what it is to be needy, so that's why we help those in need, kind of thing. But emotional, kind of as an emotional state, I don't. And then the good comes from responding to the other. So goodness is the ethical encounter is the good.
Okay. So,
But
okay.
I'll actually look further into that.
It's it's like turning psychology in my head upside down, because we have motivations, which are basically emotional states, as a foundation of behavior. That's what we teach and what we study. And so here, I'm just trying to think, okay, or how do I link motivation? If, for example, I were to understand it as a psychologist, then motivation has to be constitutively somehow built or linked to the presence of others from a get-go, from the very beginning. So then it's just totally decentralizes the subject, and then my motivations are sort of like acting in reverse. I think they are mine, but in fact, I'm just a seat of motivations which are basically initiated by others to whom I'm present, or something like this. I mean, it's
I think there is a decentralizing of the self that Levinas wants to do.
it's very, yeah.
But I think he also wants to found it on the fact that we know what enjoyment is, and we want to enjoy, and we know what hunger is, and so that is the basis on which we can decentralize our experiences, really, because it's challenging.
That's interesting. Well, I really would love for you to come to our circle. It's very different from time to time. We have a reading group which meets once a month, and there are people from Poland and from Puerto Rico and professional philosophers, so it would be wonderful to have your presence. Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to come.
Okay, so then just I'll send an email in which I will just spell out the schedule. It's going through Sophere mailing list, but as from our recent experience and in general, the group emails, they have a tendency to end up in spam, or people don't see it necessarily. So, okay. Does anybody have any other comments or questions to Anna? Okay.
Anna, I've really enjoyed learning more about Levinas's perspective on the face and the voice and the responsibility that we experience through the community of faces and voices. And I hope to pass along, I don't know if this has been recorded, maybe I can pass along to some of my friends in the Jewish community who I think would really enjoy your talk today, and everybody's comments as well, Courtney and Vincent, and of course Olga. Thank you.
Karen, yes, it is recorded, or so the screen tells me. So probably in a day or two, I will send a link and post it on the website, and of course send the video to Anna.
Oh, good, wonderful. Because I had friends who wanted to sit in on this, but they just couldn't. So.
Okay.
That'll be great.
So Anna, one more idea. We are beginning to shape the open theology thematic issue on religious experience for 2019. And of course there is a conference upcoming, but conferences in Berkeley, and you will be more than welcome to this conference. Do you have the information on that? Is it realistic, or
I saw some. I have to just crunch the numbers. But I would love to attend if possible.
Well, please come. If possible, it would be great to meet you in person. But there is this possibility of publication upcoming, and we will lucky in negotiating the financial agreement with Open Theology. So the conference papers will have a priority and will be probably published at a discount or maybe even free, and then free of charge. And then there is this thematic issue. So if you know, there is probably a significant chunk of your work that we didn't have chance to discuss today on unity, etc. So you're welcome. It's a research-focused publication. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So any comments or questions still remaining?
Only to thank everybody, and thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really a delight, and just thinking that you are lecturing from England is fantastic in itself. Yeah.
It's been such a privilege, and thank you each for listening and for contributing. I've really valued that.
Thank you, and very best of luck with your teaching and flourishing.
Thank you so much.
Research. Okay.
Hope to see you soon.
Hope to see you soon. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is the end of the meeting, and I'm going to stop recording and thank everybody for your presence and close the meeting. Then now.
Thanks, Olga.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.